Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Darryl Grove and I'm joined by a man who keeps threatening to body slam me.
Oh boy.
It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. I would, except I'm pretty sure if I tried to, you'd win that one. You got a size difference on me there.
Well, we're about the same size.
You got a few inches on me, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
We had somebody tweet in today to say like that they dreamed that they met us in the dream. And
That's a disappointing dream.
Well, first of all, yes. Second of all, my response was going to be something like, was I at least taller in the dream? but I was walking two dogs at the time and one of them started to pull.
This is my revenge for... do you remember a photo was taken when we were at WRAR?
Hence the evil cackle, yes.
Yeah, and so there's four of us, right? It's me and you, and I believe it was Albert and Josh, back when there's four of us on the show. And you all, at the moment of the photo, stood up on your tiptoes and made me look like 6 inches shorter than everybody else there.
Yeah, I remember... And I think there's a photo of it that's still out there somewhere with, I think there's like a caption of like the TSS crew, and the only comment is you saying, I can't stress enough that Taylor is standing on his tippy toes.
All right, enough about who's taller.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Under-20 World Cup. Today we're going to talk about the US Under-20s, their 1-0 win over Senegal with the goal from Josh Sargent. We're also, later in the show, I'm going to be talking to Matt Hermann of the Talking Fußball podcast about the Bundesliga. We're going to have a Bundesliga review and a preview of the DFB Pokal. That's how you pronounce it. Pokal.
All right.
And you know why we're doing that, right?
Why is that?
Because it's America-tastic. It's
Indeed.
Christian Pulisic and Borussia Dortmund and Timmy Chandler and Eintracht Frankfurt. So that's all to come later on in the show. Shall we start in Korea?
I think we probably should.
Yeah, so 1-0, Josh Sargent, hooray!
Josh Sargent, hooray.
Yes.
As I told you off air, I did goal mouth last night. I had my script ready. I waited to see what the result of this game was. And the kind of link up between one story and the U20s was dependent upon Josh Sargent scoring. He did not let me down.
So you gambled on Josh Sargent and won?
I backed him. I had faith in him. I'll put it that way.
All right, before we get too specific about the goal, we're not going to go too deep into this game, right? Because we realise probably most people won't have watched it, but most people would like just a little bit of a review and a little bit of analysis. That's what we're going to offer. What do we make of the US's performance before we get deep in on the goal?
I thought it was more consistent than what we saw in the opener against Ecuador.
Yes.
There were still moments of where you could see that it was U20s. It was some errant passing. It was some questionable decision-making, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
There was some poor communication, but it was definitely a stronger performance.
Literally, there's a moment where a ball was popped up in the air, and I think Eric Palmer-Brown came out to head it, and also Eric Williamson jumped up to head it, and they sort of collided with each other, and it just needed someone to sort of yell their name.
And even that, that can happen at the professional senior level. The difference there being that happened in the US's box about 12 yards from goal, and it led to a decent chance for Senegal. It was headed over, but it was still a very threatening opportunity for Senegal. That's not something you really want to see if you're an American fan.
And it was notable that Cameron Carter-Vickers, who was in the team, I think he's fit enough to play now, so Tommy Redding loses his spot. Cameron Carter-Vickers was the guy that was the most angry about that because he's the guy that's played at the highest level.
It was a lot of that kind of clapping, let's go, and then a few pointed points. I'll put it that way.
I feel like this doesn't happen at Tottenham kind of moment.
Yeah. Speaking of Cameron Carter-Vickers, we had a scouting report sent in by Will Cunningham about CCV. Will said CCV started and played the full 90 in the win over Senegal and was U.S. Soccer's man of the match for a great display in defense.
I think that's fair, right? He did. We talked on the last show about how Tommy Redding was kind of let down by Aaron Herrera. Yeah. But he also, when he was let down and put in tough spots, he didn't come up big. He actually got beat twice in the first 7 minutes to concede 2 goals. Yeah. Cameron Carter-Vickers is an upgrade.
He is, and I think back to the last time we saw Cameron Carter-Vickers at the U20 World Cup, which was the last U20 World Cup.
Yeah.
And it felt like in that game, it was Matt Miazga, who was a little bit more the kind of seasoned veteran, and Cameron Carter-Vickers, who maybe was the one who was making a few of the mistakes. You could see tonight that he has matured. Even if he hasn't gotten regular playing time for Spurs, you can still see that he is a more confident defender, that he is the one who came into the lineup, hasn't played in a very long time, but was the one who was sort of doing a good job of organizing and keeping his side of the field contained. Yeah. And then we saw Eric Palmer-Brown continuing to do good things.
Absolutely. We actually, after the last game, we got a sort of scouting report / critique of TSS that when we talked about how the defence was a shambles against Ecuador, which it really was considering those 3 goals, we forgot to mention that EPB was actually the bright spot. Eric Palmer-Brown was actually very good in that game, had a lot of blocks, a lot of defensive, really good tackles, and looked very smooth and calm on the ball. He did all that again this morning against Senegal, but with everyone around him, with maybe one exception, having it together as well.
Yeah, so you're right. I think my point about CCV and Matt Miazga from the last tournament doesn't really work. It's more so that like CCV has upped his game and Eric Palmer-Brown is also at a high level.
Yeah.
So the two center backs, and I think this was your point, that like the two center backs are very strong. We can kind of count on them.
Yes.
Maybe the fullbacks are a little bit of a question mark.
So Danny Acosta at left back.
Yeah.
We noted this in the U20 CONCACAF Championship, right? He will drift out of position sometimes. He's not a natural left back, but he is like kind of very good at making up for any bad positional mistakes, and he will get back and make a tackle. He's excellent on the ball, so it's kind of, we're mostly good on that side, even because he'll just have to make up for his occasional mistake. We're solid in the middle, but over at right back, with Marlon Fossey injured, it's Aaron Herrera starting. He looks, to me, I've never seen a more obvious example of someone who probably looks really good at college level, but is now a little bit out of his depth. And I hope he doesn't listen to this because I feel bad saying it.
I'm sure he's got other things going on. Plus, time difference. I don't know how that works out. But it's because, as we talked about previously, Marlon Fossey would be starting at right back. He pulled out with injury, so you have Herrera starting instead. And I think I was pretty concerned because 10 minutes into the game or 7 minutes in, Herrera gets beat, overcommits, then has to commit a foul, gets a yellow card for it. And his positioning was suspect multiple other times in this game. He had to make kind of desperation plays at times, and that really does lend itself to getting another card, getting that red card, and potentially the U.S. being in a lot of trouble. That didn't happen, but he definitely had moments that made us both a little bit nervous.
And it wasn't just defensively being in the wrong spot or stepping when he shouldn't or not stepping when he should. There was also just when the U.S. had possession, he kind of took the wrong angle many, many times, and the ball out to the fullback wasn't on because he cut himself off. Yeah,
and so I think it's even more kind of damning on his part because it felt like there was also a right winger out there to assist him that kind of could give him support.
Brooksy Lennon.
That could combine. Whereas I think part of the not problem for Danny Acosta, but maybe why he was caught out a couple times is because the theoretical left winger, Luca De La Torre, was more of a central midfielder. There really wasn't anybody on that channel except for Danny Acosta.
Doesn't Luca De La Torre seem like a guy who's definitely a central midfielder?
Yeah.
But central midfield is full. With Derek Jones holding it down defensive midfield. He was excellent again. I'm really happy that he is now a defensive midfielder. Tyler Adams, the excellent Tyler Adams, and Eric Williamson ahead of him. And then there's not quite room for Luca De La Torre, but Tab Ramos also doesn't want to leave him out of the team, it feels like.
Yeah.
So he says play left wing / centre left midfield. And he gives us numbers in midfield sometimes, so it kind of works out, right?
And I think you're right that in other occasions he's told Luca De La Torre, play left wing. If you drift inside a little bit, that's fine. In this game, either that, Luca De La Torre said, left wing, not so much, I'm playing in the middle. Or I think more likely, Tab Ramos said, you go central, we're not so worried about the flanks. We're worried about their ability to play through the middle. Senegal, I think we're in a 4-4-1-1, so they definitely had 4 players in the middle there that maybe needed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we have Luca De La Torre very central. But there were definitely times, I think you paused it at one point to be like, there's just no one on that wing. And it really was 4 players standing in the middle for the U.S.
And it seems to me as well, this is the big thing with this team, this U.S. team. I don't think they're great in possession at building a play and making something happen. They're very good at sort of a swift, I want to call it a counter-attack essentially. They'll win the ball off you and just go. And they'll go through Tyler Adams or Eric Williamson or De La Torre or get Brooks Lennon down the wing or they'll find Josh Sargent.
Yeah.
But the turnover and then the attack will happen and come very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's where they're most dangerous.
Absolutely. Right? And I'll add to that before we get to the goal, because that kind of sets it up.
I think that's what people are waiting to hear about as well.
Yeah. But they also have an element of CONCACAF to them, that they do know how to, Josh Sargent, he gets clipped at the end. He definitely got caught, a boot to the thigh.
Yeah,
that definitely hurts.
It was arm then thigh.
Yeah, but he definitely took his time getting up and knew exactly what he was doing, I think. That he was happy to kill a couple minutes.
So we're the CONCACAFers.
Well, that, and then even in the lead up to the goal, the thing that I think you pointed out maybe 30 seconds before is that Eric Williamson trucks somebody on Senegal.
Yes, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the Senegalese player, but he tries to do that thing where you put the ball one side and then you run around the other side of the player and meet the ball.
Yeah.
You and the ball joined again on the other side of him, right? Instead, Eric Williamson just stood his ground.
In soccer matrimony.
Senegalese player runs straight into him. I think it was near a sideline microphone.
Yep.
So you just hear a...
Yep.
And then you see Senegalese player go down, and Eric Williamson is just he briefly puts his hands up I don't know, I was just standing here.
Yeah.
And he just takes the ball and starts the counter-attack.
He does. And and basically from there it sets up the U.S. counter. I think Senegal are able to clear off of that one. It goes to Cameron Carter-Vickers, who gets ahead to it.
Yep.
That goes to the much-maligned Herrera.
His best play of the game, I think, was this next ball that he played.
Yeah, so he does a good job of collecting the ball and turning and then playing the ball to... theoretically, Tyler Adams is who he's looking for. Yeah, but Tyler Adams is crafty.
This is where this goal is created, right? This is where the US, at speed and in a transition, kind of one clever move from Tyler Adams.
Yep.
He knows that they're all coming for him, right?
Three different Senegalese players.
3 Senegalese players are coming for him. He lets them crowd around him, and instead of like receiving the ball, and then he would have just got crushed in like a triangle of Senegalese defenders would have closed in on him, right?
Yep.
Instead of letting that happen, he just deftly flicks the ball on.
Yes, and it's really good technical ability to be able to like have that ball come in and just give it that little flick to redirect.
Draw and flick.
But really good vision as well, because it like even that moment of skill, like we could probably recreate that, you and I could, but we would do so by being like, oh, there's Daryl, and then looking back at the ball, like really telegraphing it, because you kind of got to know those types of things.
We should have rewatched to see when does Tyler Adams glance, when does he see Luca de la Torre.
He doesn't really glance that much, and that's why he doesn't really give it away. That's why he's got
the Xavi chameleon eyes, where he can sort of scan the field,
or the Pele eyes, where he can see behind his head, which is not what actually happened, but he had really good peripherals. But anyway, he doesn't really telegraph it, so that little flick comes off, it splits 2 players, and suddenly Luca de la Torre is wide open in space, and it's a really, really clever bit of skill and good vision.
And as we talked about, Luca de la Torre is sort of in the central area, not out wide on the left, so this kind of pays off in this moment.
Yes, especially since I think it comes from the right-hand side. It's Herrera, so Luca de la Torre just doing what he wants to do.
Yep. So he gets that ball to Josh Sargent. It's Sargent's first touch that I'm really excited about. So if you haven't seen this, he receives the ball sort of with his right foot and spins around, right? Because he's kind of back to goal, spins around to be facing goal with a shooting opportunity with his left foot, and in doing so just confuses the defender who was trying to track him because he doesn't know where he's going. This is one of my favourite skills in soccer.
Why is that?
Because it almost, I know, I mean, I can do it, right? Because it's kind of not massively hard to do. It's not some super, like, around-the-world thing where you need to be a freestyle soccer player to do it. But I still think when you see it happen, it kind of looks like it defies the laws of physics.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't be able to use the instep of your of your foot to take the ball like in that direction.
Yeah, it's. You know I mean, if you imagine,
momentum should make it bounce off.
Yeah, imagine if you the listener are facing goal, the goal's in front of you, the ball's coming in to your right hand side, but it's a little bit behind you, so you have to turn to receive it. So just imagine as you turn, you're receiving it with your right foot, and then you like bring that right foot all the way around, and you kind of spin around, and suddenly it's on your left foot to shoot.
Yeah, it's like a magic trick.
Basically, or like Velcro. Like maybe he has Velcro shoes or something like that. I mean, they are young; they may still be using Velcro shoes. I don't really know. But no, I mean, it's a really good bit of skill to do that, but it's also a really good finish because it is that it sets up the idea that like, oh, you're rolling away now, you're probably going to hit it far post. And so I think the keeper cheats just a little bit thinking that's where that shot is going, and instead it goes back across to the near post.
He sends it back the other way, right?
He does indeed.
Fools everybody.
Buries that shot.
Yes, he does. Josh Sargent, 17, joint top scorer at the U20 World Cup with 3 goals now.
Not bad. I also want to say, though, that I think a lot of times when you talk about a pass coming in and the striker has to adjust his run and it's a little bit behind him, it means it's a bad ball. In this situation, when you watch the replays, Luca de la Torre can't play it in front because basically it's going to be collected by the goalkeeper if he does that.
Yep.
If he plays it really in front of Josh Sargent for him to run on a hit one time, it's going to be intercepted by 2 of the different Senegalese defenders who are still in the box. So he plays it to basically the only place he can play it that will still be in reach of Josh Sargent.
I agree. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that ball at all. It's the right ball. But I think he's expecting Sargent to just like settle it and then maybe lay it off to someone else. I don't think Luca de la Torre is expecting the Josh Sargent Velcro spin, which is what I'm calling that move.
I like it. No, he probably isn't. But who knows? Luca de la Torre doesn't show any emotion, so he probably didn't. He probably wasn't surprised, or if he was, he didn't let anybody know.
All right, so the US see the game out 1-0 with a couple of defensive moves from Tab Ramos, right? He brings, I think Williamson comes off, and on comes Justin Glad, centre back, coming back from injury, as Cameron Carter-Vickers was, who plays alongside Derek Jones. So we now have essentially 2 centre backs and then 1 centre back alongside a big defensive midfielder. It looks almost like 4 centre backs to see this game out. And Justin Glad heads a few balls away.
He does
to close the game out.
A couple timely interceptions and a couple from all 4 of those gentlemen. A couple key clearances in the sense that like it's a bouncing ball in the box. It would be easy to whiff. It'd be easy to hit it straight up in the air. To have the confidence and poise to boot that ball clear and make solid contact. It's worth commending.
So the next game is coming. I actually don't know what day it is. Do you have that in front of you?
I believe it is Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure
that's
it.
Against Saudi Arabia.
So excuse me to bring out our giant calendar. I'll let you know.
Oh, because we've marked down what games we're watching in the future.
Believe we have, yes.
Okay, I'll fill while you do that. Next game is against Saudi Arabia.
5 a.m. on Sunday the 28th.
Oh, DVR it is then.
Or maybe 5:30. But either way, very early on Sunday morning. Yeah.
So Saudi Arabia... They beat Ecuador
in
the other game. This is a huge surprise, right?
For me, it was only because I just assumed that Ecuador were very good.
Yeah.
We've played them at senior level a number of times. They're always very competitive. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia, not always competitive at senior level. Maybe that's different at U20s, but it also makes me a little bit more concerned about that 3-3 draw. Just because when it's like 3-3, it's against Ecuador, they're really, really good. They're a proven common bowl entity.
That's what it turns out they're rubbish all along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're dead last in the group right now, so yeah.
Wow. Okay, so what does the US need to do? Will a draw against Saudi Arabia see us through?
I mean, honestly, they might be through already because I think like 4 of the best third-place teams go through. But that's not how you want to go through.
But the goal is to win the group, right? So why don't we just beat Saudi Arabia?
And if we do, then I think we play, right now it would be New Zealand in the knockout round.
We're Group F. We play the runner-up in Group E, which right now would be New Zealand.
Yes.
I think if New Zealand beats France, then it might be France, which would not be good. Right. But again, we're basing all this on the strength of the senior team, right? Maybe the New Zealand under-20s are sort of out of this world.
I mean, Argentina already eliminated. So that tells you something.
Thanks to England and South Korea.
So to wrap it all up, that's the USA on top of the group with 4 points. Senegal, I believe, in second on 3. Saudi Arabia in third on 3. Ecuador with 1 point. So if the U.S. gets a draw in that final game against Saudi Arabia, then they are definitely going through in at least second place.
Okay, and Josh Sargent, so far, the man of the tournament. The big rumour is that he's going to Werder Bremen.
Yep.
More about that possible move and where he fits in at Werder Bremen later in the show when I talk to Bundesliga expert Matt Hermann.
One thing, though, I heard he might be going to Bayern Munich. I heard that somewhere.
Really?
Uh-huh. No, I heard that on my goal mouth today. In a completely unsubstantiated rumor that I made up.
If you haven't heard Goldmouth yet, today's a great day to jump in. It's a really good episode from Taylor this morning in which he makes sure the Total Soccer Show and Goldmouth will never be sponsored by Pepsi.
I'm fine with that. I did see. I released that episode. I waited for this game to happen. I recorded that episode, put it out. Then I took my dogs for a walk. 3 different restaurants in my neighborhood were getting restocked with Pepsi. So there were big Pepsi trucks, and I felt a little bit like they're onto me.
The Pepsi secret police.
Yeah, exactly. If I go missing, it was Pepsi.
Before we talk to Matt Hermann, we got some scouting reports today. Scouting reports from the TSS Scouting Network, and we'll start with Michael Hartman scouting no less a player than Josh Sargent, 17-year-old American.
Of him. Yeah.
Michael writes that he was only able to watch the first half, but in addition to the goal, Josh was a constant threat, made some very good passes to open up opportunities in the middle of the field. Michael also noticed Sargent would come back to defend during opposing set pieces in our final third, so a lot of ground covered in the game by Josh.
Indeed, and even at the end of the game, where it was basically the U.S. in a 4-1 and then one way up the field. Really, very defensive.
Yeah.
There was a couple times when Josh Sargent would get the ball, have nobody around him, but hold the ball up, hold off a defender, hold up for a couple more seconds, then play it out wide, and sometimes trigger an attack, sometimes boot it into space, sometimes draw a foul. Really good work from him up top.
I'm actually really glad that Michael sent this game report, because that's a thing I think I criticised Sargent for in the first game against Ecuador, that his hold-up play wasn't as good for the U20s as it was against the U17s, because everybody's bigger. But it really does seem like either he was just up against an opponent that suited him more, or he's figured something out about how to hold the ball up at this level. He was also really good running in behind, right? Yep. There were almost connections with Brooks Lennon and Tyler Adams that with Josh Sargent just darting behind the defence.
Yep.
And didn't you catch him doing the Luis Suarez thing?
Oh, yeah. He sits about a yard offside when there's a free kick coming in, red as it's being taken, he hops back on, then rushes goal. Oh, yeah. It's a sign of a striker.
It sure certainly.
Oh, and on behalf of Josh Sargent, apology accepted for you.
What's that? Oh, from Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
We've had the report from Will Cunningham. Thank you, Will. So we will move on to Steve Renard scouting Yuri Tielemans, the 20-year-old Belgian midfielder for Monaco.
Is it official?
We know that because Steve sent us a screenshot of the official club announcement that Tielemans will move to Monaco when the transfer window opens. He has already agreed to a 5-year deal.
Didn't Tielemans say something about, I could have gone somewhere bigger, but I wanted to go to did he use the phrase intermediate?
I believe
intermediary?
I saw the headline. I believe he specifically mentioned Manchester United.
Did he?
He had an offer from Man United, but he wanted to go to an intermediate club before he went to a big club.
Meaning I want to
giant
play.
Club. Yeah.
I love that decision.
Yep.
I really do. I'd much rather him go somewhere like Monaco and play than go somewhere where he's going to have to sit on the bench and slowly work his way in. Didn't Kylian Mbappe say something kind of similar? Like, if he were to leave Monaco, it's very important that I'm going to play. I'm not going to go just to sit on the bench at Real Madrid or something.
I think it was the reason why he's gotten where he is this season is because he was able to play. That if he hadn't been able to play, he wouldn't have been successful. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but you take what he means, yeah.
Is it possible there's a whole generation of talent that now realise that it's real dumb to go sit on the bench?
Nope.
But Martin Odegaard may be the last of the last player to do it.
Nope. Money and reputation, I think, will always have influence.
Okay, up next, Guy Jedwab is scouting Serge Gnabry, the 21-year-old German winger for Werder Bremen. Guy says that Gnabry was included in the squad for a charity match between Per Mertesackers and Clemens Fritz, which will be honouring Fritz's retirement. Both the teams are filled with Bremen legends of past and present. Mesut Ozil will be there. So Guy thinks it's pretty meaningful that Gnabry was included. Or is it just that Gnabry was like the hot stuff this season, so it was good to get him there?
It can be both. It can be both.
Future possible Josh Sargent teammate there.
Indeed. Well, moving on, we've got a report from Chris Bentley scouting Donny van de Beek, the 20-year-old Dutch midfielder for Ajax. Ruud, our Dutch pronunciation correspondent. I hope I did that okay, because I know you have told us how to pronounce this before.
Can I have a go?
Sure.
Van de Beek?
See, here's the thing. You've toned it down when we were practicing this earlier. You were hitting that hard. Let's hear it like way over the top.
Oh, no, so that was more like to strengthen the muscle. I was doing it extra, going Van de Beek.
Yeah, right? There it is.
when you overdo it, then it's easier. It's like running a marathon so that you can run a 10K easily.
I see. Gotcha. Well,
thank you to Ruud.
Thank you to Ruud and thank you to Chris, who writes, today was a bad day for my scout, but a good day for me. I'm assuming that means Chris is a Manchester United fan. He adds, Donny came on for Ajax in the 70th minute of their Europa League final loss, and was unsuccessful in helping Ajax mount a comeback.
That is true. I was also amazed how many Ajax players we already have in the scouting network. I kept being like, we should add him. Oh, we've already got him.
Yeah.
I think the only guy, I'm not sure if Casper Dolberg's in there.
He probably should be.
That might be a guy to add.
He probably should be.
Yeah. Okay, up next, Brian Watley is scouting Sergio Diaz, the 19-year-old Paraguayan forward for Real Madrid Castilla.
Oh, it's raining in Richmond, by the way. I don't know if that was obvious.
Yeah, if you can hear the thunder, yeah. Diaz had strong seasons for both Real Madrid Castilla and the Madrid U19s, Brian tells us, scoring 4 goals and notching 5 assists in the UEFA Youth League. More impressively, he has been called up to the Paraguayan national team for the first time for their upcoming friendlies against France and Peru in June.
Congratulations to Sergio. I assume most of the credit, though, goes to Brian for being a diligent scout.
Yeah.
Up next, Stephen Brandt scouting Marlos Morena, the 20-year-old Colombian attacker for Deportivo La Coruña on loan from Manchester City.
Do you always think there's a typo and it should be Carlos Moreno?
Oh, or Marcos. Yes, any one of those.
It's definitely Marlos, right?
Yes?
It is. No, it is.
All right.
I know because I keep checking.
Steven says, Liga MX side Querétaro reportedly want Moreno on loan, but Deportivo have the option to bring him back for a second season. Moreno had a difficult time getting on the pitch this year, so it's difficult to say what's going to happen going forward. Also, credit to Pedro, who appeared on the Wikipedia episode we did 2 weeks ago, for teaching me how to pronounce that team name properly.
So, if you're wondering what Taylor said, it looks like it should be pronounced Querétaro.
Yep.
But the correct way to pronounce it is... It's a Mexican team, right? Correct way to pronounce it is...
And Pedro is Spanish, so grain of salt there, but he said Querétaro.
Querétaro. All right. Thank you to Stephen for that report. Final report comes from Jay Glenn, scouting Ruben Neves, the 20-year-old Portuguese midfielder for Porto. I said that surprised because I just remember Neves always being a teenager.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was like he's still 20 or he's now 20.
No, he's finally
gotcha.
20. Yeah,
gotcha.
Okay. Jay says, Ruben made his way into the Porto starting lineup for 2 of the final 4 matches this season. He adds... You quote, you can't help but become a bit attached to your assigned player, but I especially like Ruben as he reminds me of my favourite player, Xabi Alonso. He is not yet physically strong enough to succeed as a defensive mid, and I personally question if he's quick enough, but his passing is fantastic. Like Alonso, he just sends the ball across the pitch and right onto the foot of his teammate. Porto has sacked Nuno Espirito Santo and seemingly has Marco Silva lined up as a replacement. Who doesn't, Taylor?
Indeed.
Who doesn't?
I think they can join the list of suitors.
The whole City coach, right?
Yeah. He also added, I added this one up a little bit. Jay also noted that there was maybe a theory, at least he had a theory, that Nuno Espirito Santo did not like Ruben Neves, which is maybe why he didn't get more minutes this season.
Okay.
So maybe with a new manager, that'll change things.
He finishes, at least in this version, saying Porto is also in a bad financial situation and will likely need to sell heavily this summer, meaning that Neves could be in line for considerable minutes next year.
We shall see.
Yeah, the fire sale is the friend of the young player.
It is
for a first team spot.
It is indeed. If not the fan or stability or title challenges, then yes, it is the friend of the young player.
So thank you to everybody who sent us scouting reports today. It's Michael, Will, Steve, Guy, Chris, Brian, Stephen, and Jay. We're going to talk some Bundesliga now, Taylor.
All right.
But not with the likes of you.
All right, fine.
So earlier today,
I'll leave now.
I called up Matt Hermann of the Talking Fußball podcast. Don't really leave.
I'm out of here.
So when we did this last time, we got a great response. Taylor really has left. We got a great response from people. They really like Matt's take on the Bundesliga. So listen in. We're going to do a review of the Bundesliga. We're going to talk about what's happening with Americans, talk about what's happening with Josh Sargent, and we're going to preview the DFB Pokal, the German Cup final. Okay, here's my interview with Matt. Matt Hermann, welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. How you doing?
I am well. It's good to be here.
Where are we catching you? Are you in London? Are you in Germany? Where are you at?
I am in London at the moment. I just got back earlier this week.
From Germany?
Yep. We're doing some work in Berlin. Went to the last match of the season for Hertha versus Leverkusen, which was a rough one.
How did that finish?
It finished 6-2 to the visitors, Leverkusen, which was about as nightmarish a result as I've ever seen live from Hertha.
Were any of the goals John Brooks' fault?
Oh, there's a lot of fault to go around. I mean, truthfully, there was a couple of penalties in there. I don't recall him being directly at fault for either of those, but the entire Hertha defense was dreadful and was basically rubbernecking all over the back. So, should we
start there then? We start there. We're going to do a bit of a season review of the Bundesliga. But I do know you're a big Hertha fan and a big John Brooks fan. And last time we talked about how you did not want to see John Brooks on the move. Is there any talk of a John Brooks transfer in the air now that the season is over?
Yeah, absolutely. He's probably, other than Mitchell Weiser, who, has been injured for most of the second half of the season. So some of the rumors about him leaving have cooled off. John Brooks is probably the player who has the most transfer rumors swirling around him. Very little specific as yet, but there is beginning to be a sense, especially since the emergence of a new player for Hertha, Jordan Torunariga, good, promising young guy straight out of the academy, who has comported himself pretty well in about 8 or 9 appearances in the second half of the season. The thought is that if they get a big money offer for him, and those have been in the air for a long time, this might be the summer to cash in before it's too late.
So in which direction are those rumors swirling him?
Mostly England.
I see.
I think there's not a natural fit for him right now at German clubs that can spend a lot of money. And at the moment, the biggest spenders are only Bayern and Dortmund. Wolfsburg used to splash around some cash, but now they're in some relegation trouble and might not be spending anything, might be looking to shed salary for a while. So it's every German club's dream to get a sort of inflated bid from an English club, and they may well be trying to engineer just that this summer.
Like a reverse Brexit.
Oh, absolutely. Can
we talk about Bobby Wood and Hamburg? Because they survived. Hamburg not in a relegation playoff. It's Wolfsburg, as you mentioned, to it in that relegation playoff instead. And it had looked bad for Hamburg for a little while. So how did they turn things around and get themselves out of that relegation spot?
Well, they got 2 very dramatic results in the last 2 weeks of the season. The second to last match day, they eked out a draw against Schalke in basically the last minute, although they almost surrendered their tied position with even less time to go, and a referee said that a corner kick went out before going back in, which turned out to be a wrong call, but that's neither here nor there. But even in the last week of the season, Hamburg looked like they were going to be in the relegation playoff pretty much the whole game. Fans across Germany, either in the other stadiums or watching on television, thought, yeah, all right, they're penciled in for the playoff, as they have been 2 out of the last 3 years.
Right.
But, they got a very important goal very late from a player who had never scored for them in the past. And, it's about the most dramatic finish for Hamburg you could ever want. It's a guy named Luca Waldschmidt, or Gianluca Waldschmidt, who hadn't done a lot of good this season for Hamburg. It's been a season of great turmoil for them. And I'm shocked, actually, to see that they're not in the relegation playoff. I thought that they've been, at least for the last 10 games or so, richly deserving of a chance to go down.
So, yeah, what's the thing I've read is that essentially Bobby Wood has been performing well, but is essentially a striker in a team where he's getting no service. And therefore he's weirdly sort of celebrated for making the best of a bad job. Is that sort of more or less accurate?
Yeah. I would say most Hamburg fans would like a bit more productivity out of Bobby Wood, and he did have some chances, especially in those last two games where he didn't manage to score. He could have saved their bacon a bit sooner than it got saved.
Okay.
But in terms of his work rate and in terms of, the sort of, directness, strength, speed, and sort of, determination to score, which a lot of the Hamburg players, let's face it, don't have, they really like him. I mean, some of the worst culprits in terms of service are the players behind him in midfield, and especially their wing players. They have some especially inefficient wing players. A guy named Philipp Kostic, who was sort of a highly touted player when he was at Stuttgart, and Hamburg spent a fair bit of money on him a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I've seen his highlight reel. His highlight reel is very impressive, but it seems his season-long production not so much.
It's dizzying how bad some of his production numbers. I mean, he crosses a lot, and he's not good at crossing. He dribbles a lot, and he's not good at dribbling. He just basically gives the ball away a ton and doesn't play a lot of effective key passes. But when he does things right, it looks pretty good. And he did score 4 or 5 goals this season, so he's not a useless player. Someone just needs to rein him in or surround him with better players. I mean, Hamburg made a lot of bad personnel moves going into this season. Some of the players, both Kostic and his counterpart on the other wing, Nikolai Müller, who they bought from Mainz, has also not been the player that they thought they were getting. But the big problem at the beginning of this season is that they sort of mortgaged the house on a player, a sort of reclamation project from Barcelona, Alen Halilovic.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be an absolute disaster. Basically, he did not get on with the coach that Hamburg had at the beginning of the season, Bruno Labbadia. He sulked, and after scoring a goal in his first appearance in the German Cup, he didn't basically do anything else for the rest of his time. He left in the winter. They sent him to Las Palmas, and it was just a terribly, terribly demoralizing place to start the season. I mean, Bobby Wood was a really good buy. I think most folks were very happy to stay up, not only to stay up, but to hold on to a player like that who surely would have left had they gone down. But that was a real big miss for them.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to the Halilovic-Bobby Wood partnership. I had this vision of him sort of providing nice little through balls for Bobby Wood to run onto. I know Bobby Wood is going to stay now, right, because they stayed up. I think he signed a new contract. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there any reason to be more optimistic next season? Is there any sort of thought of Hamburg buying someone who can sort of at least provide some through balls for Bobby Wood to run onto, as he loves to do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the weird thing about Hamburg, which is sort of the double-edged sword for them, is they're always only a year away, or at least that's sort of how they see it in their heads.
Right.
And every year they claim to have learned from past mistakes or learned from the sort of modicum of success that they achieved. For example, season before last, I think they finished something like 8th. And they thought, all right, well, now we can build on this and we can get into Europe this year. We just need to add that one piece, Alen Halilovic and Bobby Wood or whatever. And it turned out that one of those two was a real stink bomb, and it just messed up the entire beginning of the club. They only waited about 6-7 matches to fire their coach, which is something that they are also notorious for doing. If they can get a bit of stability with Marcus Gisdol, who I think is a good coach, despite the fact that they had a real dip in form towards the end of the season. And they can make a couple smart buys as opposed to dumb buys. This is a club that has money. It's a club that is very, very
big
supported.
Team, right? Big city.
Yeah, it's a huge team. I mean, this should be, in terms of the number of supporters and the sort of financial stability that they have, this should be about the 4th or 5th biggest club in Germany. That's their natural place. They just haven't been there a long time.
Maybe like the Newcastle of Germany is how I...
Yeah, there's a little bit of competition for that title, but I think that's about right.
Well, maybe in a similar boat, Wolfsburg are the team that replaced Hamburg in that relegation playoff spot. I want to ask you sort of what went wrong with Wolfsburg, because they're another big team, right? So they shouldn't necessarily be in relegation trouble. Did they win the league maybe less than 10 years ago?
They did. They won in 2009, and they won the Cup 3 years ago.
So what's happened there?
Oh, a lot of things. I mean, basically, the team that was most successful in the most recent era, leaving aside the team that was driven by Grafich and Edin Dzeko, which was a beautiful, beautiful team to watch, but is sort of long since passed. The last team that was good was the one that was built around Kevin De Bruyne. And basically, they just didn't spend their money very wisely looking to replace him. They bought Julian Draxler, who I really rate as a player, and he's shown himself at Paris Saint-Germain to be still quite a good, promising player. Mm-hmm. But he never seemed to really fit in or sort of deal with the pressure of carrying that club very well. They also spent a bunch of money bringing in Andre Schürrle, who also didn't settle well there, and now has, of course, moved on again to Dortmund, where he hasn't looked that great either. Yeah. And they just sort of threw a bunch of ideas at the wall, hoping that one would stick, and it hasn't so far. Yunus Mali, I thought, was a nice buy in the winter. I thought last summer when they bought Daniel Didavi, a sort of, I guess you could call him either a withdrawn striker or a number 8 or something like that. He also hasn't quite produced as well as he did in his final year at Stuttgart, his first fully healthy year in the Bundesliga. He had some injury niggles this season. From the respect of seeing a bunch of good players like that stay in the Bundesliga, I would like to see them stay up. But at the same time, it'd be really fascinating to see them lose that relegation playoff, because it would start an absolutely outlandish feeding frenzy for that squad, because there's a ton of players in there who both are on big money and they can't afford to keep paying in the second division. Right. And frankly, guys who wouldn't be interested in playing in the second division. I mean, some of the guys who they brought in the winter, like Mali, like Richelde Bazoer from the Netherlands, these guys didn't come to Wolfsburg to play, D2 football. They're going to want to go somewhere else.
I want to ask about that relegation playoff as well, because obviously it's not something familiar to American soccer culture for multiple reasons, but it's also not familiar to me with English soccer culture. So how big is that game, for example? Because it's the third bottom team in the Bundesliga plays the third top team in Bundesliga 2?
Yeah, exactly. It's a strange format, I have to say. I think maybe they do it in the Netherlands as well, that format, but as far as I know, it's fairly unique to Germany, and it does have, in a lot of ways, less romance in it than the English format, where you take 4 teams in a sort of free-for-all mad scramble for promotion, and then you just send the 3 worst teams straight down. I mean, they've also experimented with they had it for a while, then they got rid of it for a while, and they brought it back. I'm not exactly sure what the rationale behind all that was, but there is, for example, some of the coaches and sporting directors, even who are directly involved in this year's relegation fight, said, I don't care what the benefit to my team would or wouldn't be. I don't think this is a good format. I don't think that it's fair to give a team who finished third bottom fair and square another chance to stay in the league, because since they brought it back in, I believe, 2009, I think only 2 lower division sides, second division sides, have beaten top flight sides to get into the league. So it's a pretty lopsided record in favor of the bigger clubs in general. I mean, it is a huge game, in part because it has so much natural drama built into it. There's also been some weird happenings. I mean, Hamburg saved themselves, beat Karlsruhe 2 or 3 years ago in a last-minute free kick, which many people thought was wrongly awarded. There was a pitch invasion in the relegation game between Fortuna Düsseldorf and Hertha Berlin, which, Hertha were quite sore about. Some of the fans got onto the pitch before injury time had been fully played. So there's a lot of weird stuff and natural drama to this game. And it also happens at a time when the league is over, but the cup final hasn't quite yet started, at least the first leg, this Thursday night leg. It's a night when people haven't been watching a lot of football. They're kind of keen to watch it again.
I see.
It gets a big number.
Some national focus. Who's Wolfsburg's opponent?
They are playing Eintracht Braunschweig.
I am not familiar with that team.
Yeah. I mean, they had a sort of brief cup of coffee in the Bundesliga in 2013, 2014. And they're really quite poor in that season. They are one of a string of teams along the lines of your Paderborns, your Greuther Fürths, who basically come up and go straight back down. And it's very clear that they just don't have the horses to stay there. I mean, a couple of guys in that team who were playing at least short term at Braunschweig have gone on to better things. I mean, Karim Bellarabi was on loan at Braunschweig in that year. and Aaron Bicakcic, who now plays for Hoffenheim, quite a useful player. But in general, this year's Braunschweig team is not well known. It has a couple of names from that former stint in the Bundesliga. Domi Kumbela is one of their strikers again. But the real interest in this matchup, I think, is that the two clubs are so close together. Braunschweig and Wolfsburg are only about 35 kilometers apart. And it's kind of a local derby. I mean, these two teams, the history of Braunschweig, the richest part of their history is in the 60s and 70s when Wolfsburg wasn't a big club. And Wolfsburg have been more of a big deal in the last 20, 25 years. So they haven't actually overlapped that much in terms of league meetings, but their fans are definitely well up for meeting each other, let's just say.
So it's a rare derby.
Yep, it's a super rare derby. I mean, the weird thing in that region is that Wolfsburg fans basically aren't considered a rival of anybody. Like Hanover and Braunschweig consider each other their natural derby enemies because their tradition was built up at the same time in the early part of the century and the mid part of the century. And Wolfsburg is a bit of a Johnny-come-lately club. It's a works club, and nobody wants to consider them their rivals. And Wolfsburg kind of like, well, we're actually the most successful of you guys. Why can't we get a little enmity over here?
I want to ask also about another young American who is rumoured to be joining Werder Bremen, Josh Sargent. I know it's not official yet, but I'm wondering if, as a 17-year-old American joining Werder Bremen, what's the situation at Bremen in terms of their strike force? I know Aaron Johansson's there, for example. What chance does Josh Sargent have to actually play for Bremen next season?
I guess I'd have to see him first before I said for sure. And all I've done is really read about the guy. I mean, he sounds quite legit. He's scoring goals for his country in his brief stints there.
He scored this morning in the U20 World Cup.
Oh, did he? This morning? Okay. Yeah. What was the result in that, by the way?
1-0 to the US. They beat Senegal. There'll be a review of the game somewhere else on this episode. But yeah, Sargent scored a goal where he sort of received the ball and spun with one foot and shot with the other. So he's definitely sort of padding his highlight reel to make sure that move happens, I think.
Nice. Well, I guess being that I haven't really seen a lot of Sargent, and I have seen a fair bit of Bremen, at least this season's vintage of Bremen are in a bit of a transitional phase. I mean, it seems very clear to me that Max Kruse is going to be their featured striker for the foreseeable future. It looks like Claudio Pizarro is either going to retire or move on to another club. He played in the first half of the season quite a lot for Bremen, but not so much in the second half of the season. Serge Gnabry looks like he's going to be moving on in search of European football. Quite likely Hoffenheim, where he can play in the Champions League, at least if Hoffenheim gets through the qualifiers. Yeah. So there is room for someone to establish themselves as sort of the second or third option up front. I mean, at the moment, Bremen have been playing with a one-striker setup. Basically, Max Kruse playing as a lone striker with Finn Bartels directly behind him and them sort of swapping places during a match at times. Aaron Johansson has really not gotten much of a look in this season. And when he did get a chance, he didn't really take it. The one interesting thing I would say is that they have a coach in Alexander Nouri who definitely seems to trust youth. I mean, for example, when he first took the senior squad job, there was a striker in the youth ranks, a guy called Usman Mane, who made a lot of headlines both in Germany and all over the world because he had come to Germany as a refugee, and it was sort of a refugee made good story. Alexander Nouri gave him a chance in the first several games, and even gave him a couple of starts. After a few weeks, it seemed clear maybe that he wasn't quite tactically ready, and he was sort of whatever he was doing up front was perhaps his cover and the pressure he was not able to really put on the ball effectively. They needed someone else to fill that role. And also, let's be frank, when Max Kruse is in the form that he's been for the last 20 games, nobody else was going to get much of a look in. But to me, it seems clear that Alexander Nouri is a guy who likes, eager young players, and he is willing to sort of put players in a place to succeed, especially skillful guys. And if Sargent is as good as I hear he is, I don't see why he can't integrate himself over the course of a season and get some games.
So maybe just as Cruz's replacement, maybe for 10 minutes here or there, that would work for me. Because he's kind of he can play as like a lone striker from what I've seen. He's kind of pretty good at holding the ball up back to goal. So, maybe a bit of a sub for Max Kruse.
Well, and the other thing is Max Kruse, he's been playing as a lone striker, but not in a sort of target man way. I mean, Max Kruse likes to have the ball at his feet. He likes to have the ball in space, so he often drifts wide anyway. I mean, I don't know what the sort of proclivities Alexander Nuri or the rest of that sort of Bremen attack are looking for, but I could see them integrating a more of a target man guy. If he draws a bit of attention, that might make Bartels and Kruse's job even easier.
Moving on to other young Americans and slightly older Americans, the DFB Pokal's come in. It's the German Cup. It's Borussia Dortmund against Eintracht Frankfurt. Christian Pulisic against Timmy Chandler. I guess my interest, I think I've talked about Dortmund a lot on the show with Taylor. I feel like we have a good feel for Dortmund, how they play and what they do. I'm not so familiar with Eintracht Frankfurt. So could you give me a sort of like, sort of in a nutshell, sort of what to expect from Frankfurt?
Well, Frankfurt is a team that seems to be fairly tactically flexible, aside from the fact that they are not a huge ball possession team.
Okay.
They like to play a 3-5-2 setup, and I think that's part of why Timothy Chandler has shined so much for Frankfurt, in that it's a very wingback dependent way that they play, and he basically has a lot of work to do, and he does it well because he sort of gets the ball in effective places, at least attacking, and he's quick enough a defender to not embarrass himself.
Right.
It can be a strangely frustrating team to watch at times because they have a lot of Marco Fabian has been basically their most consistent attacking performer this season, but they have a lot of supporting players. Injury problems. I mean, Alexander Meyer was a guy who they depended a lot on in the past for his offensive production. He won the top scorer, the Torjäger Kanone, a couple of years ago, but he only had 5 goals this season. He only had 21 appearances. A lot of those were substitute appearances. And also, they have some players who are just a bit limited. I mean, Haris Seferovic will score some spectacular goals, a couple a season. Branimir Hrgota,
Swiss guy, Seferovic?
Yes,
I think I remember him.
He is one of their Swiss Balkan guys, of which there's so many in the Bundesliga. Ante Rebic is another kind of frustrating attacker. I mean, one of the guys that is actually the most fun in this team, and I'm not sure whether he'll actually play in the cup final, is a really young player named Ayman Barkok, who is attacking midfielder. He's actually, only 21 years old or 19 years old or something like that. Yeah, he turned 19 just 3 days ago, in fact.
It sounds like you have the roster in front of you.
I do indeed have the roster in front of me. It's good to have a little cheat sheet sometimes. I truthfully don't see them giving Dortmund a whole lot of things to worry about in this game. I mean, It was Frankfurt kind of limped into the end of the season. Like, they were in third place over the winter break. They then went through a period of, in something like 12 games, winning 1 game and scoring 10 goals or something like that. It was an absolutely unholy nosedive. And in the very last bit of the season, they seem to have gotten it together, not enough to get themselves into Europe. But I don't see Dortmund having a lot of trouble with this team.
Do you see our boy Christian Pulisic starting for Dortmund? Because I've been checking lineups recently, and he has not been in the first 11. He's been coming on here and there, right? So would it be overly optimistic to expect a start in the cup final for him?
I'm not sure. I mean, as you said, the last few weeks he has not done a lot of starting. He did start in the last league match.
Oh, he did? Okay.
These two guys. I mean, that was a good little while ago. That was, I think, I don't know, maybe in April at some point.
Yeah.
And he played well. He assisted on a goal. He set up Marco Reus, I believe, for an early goal. But I don't know. Christian Pulisic did play a whole lot in both the German Cup and the Champions League. In some ways, he was a more consistent contributor in those competitions than he was in the league. I mean, he got a lot of league time, but I really don't know. I mean, basically the reemergence of Reus as a healthy guy, the fact that Kagawa is playing and healthy, the fact that Dembele doesn't have the sort of 2 games a week thing to sort of sap some of his energy. I think in a lot of ways it's hard for Pulisic to get consistent starts in that environment.
It maybe was we had it too good for a while, right? Where a lot of, in terms of being a Pulisic fan, in that like a lot of guys were injured, and so therefore he was always going to get way more minutes than an 18-year-old normally should for a big team like Dortmund. So I keep trying to remind myself not to be too disappointed when he doesn't start, because it doesn't mean that he's suddenly like out of form or out of favour. It's just that Dortmund have this ridiculous number of attacking midfielders.
Oh yeah, and before anybody gets like too bummed out, I mean, he's still going to make, I don't know how many appearances, at least 30 for this team. It's sort of, other than the fact that they finished third in the league, which is not exactly where they want to be. I mean, this has been a great season for Dortmund, and I find it very strange, the sort of narrative that has settled around this Pokal final, which says it's a do or die for them. I think it's only a do or die in the respect that they've been in the Pokal final for this will be their 4th straight cup final, and they've lost 3 straight for the last 3 years. And they really need to get the job done this time.
I didn't realize that. Okay, yes, this is kind of a big moment, to not be... I'm trying to think, an NFL analogy would be like the Buffalo Bills at some point?
Absolutely. This is like the late 80s, early 90s Buffalo Bills.
You weren't expecting me to pull that one out, were you?
No, but there's a lot of folks here in England who surprised me with their NFL interest and knowledge, which is actually a lot greater than mine in general.
Yeah, it was on Channel 4 in the 90s. There was like a highlight package every late Sunday night, I think. So that's how I know about the Buffalo Bills from the 90s.
Nice. That was my heavy football watching, American football watching time as well. So,
anything else to know about this game? For example, where is it? Is the Pokal, I believe how you pronounced it? Do they have does Germany have like a Wembley type situation where all the finals are hosted at one place?
Yep. They are played in the Olympiastadion in Berlin, which is, Hertha's home ground, and Hertha always make a big point of saying we're gonna defend our home turf one of these days, although they basically never do. The last time Hertha was in the final was in 1993, and it was actually their reserve team that made the final, oddly enough. Huh. It's odd because the German Cup final for many, many years, I mean, they've only had it since the early 50s, but for about, 35 years, it was something that moved around the country. They would play it in Frankfurt or Hanover or sometimes Cologne, Dusseldorf, etc. And at some point in time, they decided that Berlin was the best place to sort of make it an event out of it. It's turned into a really big deal. Now they have, during a cup campaign, if a team is doing well, their way of sort of signaling that their intention is to go all the way is to sing the Berlin, wir fahren nach Berlin, like we're Berlin, we're going to Berlin.
Yeah.
And that's the way that you sort of thump your chest and say that this cup campaign is for real. And it's become a huge deal. I mean, Dortmund's fans in particular have taken to it. As I said, they seem to have made a real habit out of it. They've been to the cup final now 4 years in a row, and I guess 5 out of the last 6 years, because they even won the cup back in 2012. And they always show up with not only the fans in the stadium, but usually another 60, 70,000 fans who just watch it in public viewing, like in some of the squares in town. Or
take over the city.
Yeah, it's basically yellow and black everywhere.
All right, so the game is Saturday evening in Germany, Saturday afternoon here in the US. The US, I'm not going to remember where I am. So we'll be watching. I just noticed we haven't talked about the top end of the table. So Bayern Munich won the Bundesliga, but it wasn't like the gallop and win by March from previous years, right? Leipzig gave them something of a title challenge. And I'm wondering, I think I asked you this last time, but I think it's worth asking again. What's the expectation next year in terms of will there be some sort of big title challenge from Leipzig or Dortmund or even Hoffenheim maybe?
Yeah, it's really tricky. As much as I would like to say that there will be, and as much as I was invigorated by the momentary title challenges that, or scares of title challenges that happened during the course of the season.
Title scares is a good word.
Yeah, title scares. You look at the table at the end of the season. It's still a 15-point gap, which is pretty damn healthy.
Oh, is that what it was? All right.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you're right. There were times even 3-4 weeks ago where if Leipzig had just kept on winning, that they could have made something more of this. But I think Leipzig is probably going to be up and around the top spots again next season, but I'm not sure how well they're going to deal with playing in Europe. Dortmund is probably the more stable choice for a title rival for Bayern, but I just don't see Bayern falling on its face next year. I mean, it is very difficult to replace the sort of leadership role that you get out of a guy like Philipp Lahm or Xabi Alonso. But they are by far the richest club. They have by far the best squad. They have a decorated coach. It's really, really hard to look past them. I do, however, think it's getting to be a little bit problematic for the Bundesliga. And I haven't always thought that in the past because I always thought to myself, well, either this is going to end or there's enough interesting storylines happening elsewhere. But, I mean, this is basically almost as bad as Juventus's domination of Serie A or Olympique Lyon's domination of Ligue 1 about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just getting silly at this point. And it's tarnishing the image of the league. And I don't know that it's up to Bayern to throw it, but I sure wish they would at this point.
Is there anything the Bundesliga or the DFB could do in terms of like a revenue share or anything to like spread it around a bit more and make it more even?
Yeah, and there's always talk about changing the mathematics behind sharing TV money, but in general, that sort of thing never is to Bayern's disfavor. Sometimes it can be to favor what they call Traditionsvereine, the traditional clubs that have a lot of fans and get a lot of TV viewers, your clubs like Cologne, like Hamburg, like Schalke. Even when they aren't doing that well in their league position, they like to reward them for the sort of public activity that they bring to the game.
Right.
But, Bayern, they're both a traditional club. They get a lot of viewers. They win a lot of games. It's really hard to come up with a metric that would be fair and would also disadvantage Bayern. I mean, Bayern have shown a certain degree of charitability when it comes to helping out clubs in severe need. I mean, they for example, helped St. Pauli several years ago when they were on the verge of going bankrupt by playing a friendly with them.
Okay.
Bayern is generally really good about helping clubs that are in desperate need. But they're not looking to cut themselves a smaller slice of pie.
So it sounds like if the Bundesliga or DFB were going to do anything, it would have to be almost obviously very targeted at somehow sort of knocking Bayern down a bit, which it's not fair to do that to a team.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bayern maybe on their own motivation might take a little break from buying players from within the league or buying players from other top clubs from within the league.
Yeah.
But even that would be a very difficult thing because, the better players in the league both want to win trophies and want to get paid more money. And Bayern is a club that can do both of those things for them with a snap of a finger.
All right, so Bayern to win the Bundesliga next year, but an American to lift the Pokal this weekend, one way or another.
Why not? He might not be the first guy lifting it, but they'll pass it to him.
All right, Matt, thank you very much once again for talking to me about Bundesliga today.
Thank you.